Hey, welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today we're talking to Mike Del Ponte. Mike is a CEO coach, 3 times founder and venture capitalist, and has empowered founders to rapidly scale their startups to over 3 billion in total valuations. His expertise in fundraising, revenue growth, and building world-class teams has helped his clients thrive while avoiding painful mistakes. In addition to being a CEO coach, Mike is a serial entrepreneur and investor, has raised over 10 million from top VCs and sold Soma, his company, in 2017. He's a partner at Falkon Ventures and an advisor to Protocol Ventures, a crypto hedge fund. And Mike has a degree from Yale University and Boston College, and he is on a mission to help startup CEOs become the best leaders possible so that they can maximize their impact on the world. Mike, pleasure to have you on, man.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I do have to ask you because I didn't. I'm planning to this weekend, but did you surf this morning?
Great question. Did not get a surfing this morning,
Uh,
although it looked good. We're both SoCal guys, and unfortunately, my ankle was a little off, so
ooh,
I had to just watch the waves on the cam and hopefully get out there on Monday.
yeah, right on, man. Right on. Well, it's good to connect with the SoCal guys. All right, so I talk to a lot of thought leaders, a lot of professionals who have tremendous experience, and I want to give you not a case study, but like a recent conversation, and I want to dive into your story and to your, what you've developed. But like I talk to experienced entrepreneurs and founders, amazing track records as well. And there is like a hinge point in our thought or thinking that we have to hold on to someone else's framework or someone else's idea because they have the authority. We don't. We're just mere peasants here. But in my opinion, I think it's all the way around. If someone is signing up for one of those quote unquote franchise businesses or this other framework that serves all these businesses or this framework that has such a great brand in the marketplace, and if I'm only associated with them, then I can serve clients or serve my services at a higher level. But I think that you went in another route by creating your own framework. Before we dive into that first, I'd love to know what made you understand that creating your own is better than latching on to another existing framework, your thoughts around that, and your process to build your own framework and what it is.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I've been in Silicon Valley for 15 years, started 3 companies, been a VC, and now I'm a CEO coach. And I believe that in leadership in general, we're all trying to get to the same endpoint. If you think about it very Aristotelian, like there are eternal truths. And all these frameworks and methodologies and schools of thoughts are just best efforts to get to the ultimate truth. There's a really good Jack Welch quote, which says, the team that sees reality clearest wins.
Hmm.
And so for me, when I think about leadership and coaching, a lot of it is just helping us to see reality. No one methodology is the absolute truth. No one business book is going to get you to the finish line, but each one hopefully helps to give you a little bit better vision so that you can become a better leader.
Yeah, there's like a good Buddhist story around, I think it was like monks sitting around touching an elephant, or it was around like, what does this look like to you? Or what is or maybe it was a bow and arrow. Please don't cite me for this. But everyone has different perspectives. But then it's really understanding what is actually there and thinking through from different perspectives and different business books or models or leadership styles or even frameworks that exist in the marketplace, which almost are, they're all rhyming. It all rhymes because it's
Yeah.
all pointing to the same end goal. And I love that Jack Welch quote. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, and that metaphor of we're all touching the elephant, but touching different parts. So you're touching the foot, and I'm touching the trunk, and someone's touching the tail, and we're all touching the elephant. People can get lost in that and have a relativist perspective. Oh no, all you need is the tail, or all
Hmm.
you need is the tusk. But in fact, what it is, it's like you're touching it, but you're only seeing a tiny fraction of it. And that's really our reality on Earth, is that our perspective of reality is so limited that he who has the most and fullest perspective of reality is going to win. And so it's like you want to say, okay, great. I understand the tail and this has served me, but I can't stop here. So let me
Hmm.
go around and touch the tusk and see what that's like until you have an entire picture. And what happens is that a lot of people only have very specific, limited perspectives.
Hmm.
In the startup world where I work, we say you have to reinvent yourself every 6 to 9 months, because if you
Hmm.
don't, a couple of things may happen. Number one, you're the bottleneck of the company and the company is not successful. Or number two, the company becomes successful, but you can't keep up and you're out. And so you have to constantly be evolving and seeing the picture more fully. And if you stay at one stage, like a lot of startup people do, they're
Mhm.
hackers, good idea, couple of guys in a garage. If you stay as that kind of person, you'll never ascend. Zuckerberg's a great example of this. If he was the college student in his hoodie with three guys in a smelly room just coding all day, the company would never be what it is today. But by growing himself and then hiring a great leadership team, he was able to ascend. And so that's how I look at frameworks is we want to use them to have the best perspective reality. And I use a lot of frameworks in my practice, but I have developed one that I think is really the core and is like a shortcut for CEOs.
No, I love that. I do want to have a tangent on that point because I was going to ask you for explicit examples around he or she who has the best grasp on reality because there's a success framework or a success habit embedded into that, and you've alluded to it of evolving yourself every 6 months. But what does that actually tactically, tangibly, granularly feel like? What is the actual? Is it just always learning, that habit of always constantly seeking out new information, or what have you seen, or when the leaders that you coach work for them?
Yeah. When I talk about a startup founder needs to reinvent himself every 6 to 12 months, the reinvention is like a full transformation of self. And so there are certain things related to skills and insights that can be helpful. And it's actually a lot of times more internal development. What's interesting is that most of the time, we as leaders are just getting in our own way. I'll
Mhm.
give you an example. One of my clients, absolutely amazing entrepreneur, raised a bunch of money. And we came to the conclusion that we need to make some hard decisions around personnel. So everyone's
Mm,
seeing the headlines, a lot of
yeah.
layoffs happening. And knowing that it was right, the decision, knowing who to cut, knowing how to cut was not sufficient because there was a
Mm,
blocker around if I were to do this, does that make me a bad person? Am I going to
mm,
hurt relationships? And so for me, the most important part of that reinventing yourself every 6 to 12 months is becoming a new person, having new internal capabilities
mhm.
to move forward and be a great leader, such that those skills and insights can be implemented.
Yeah, what are the beliefs that I have to believe in order to take the activities that best serve me and those around me with the responsibilities given at any given situation? No, I love that. And having that, it sounds again simple, but it's the practice and it's the consistency over time that makes it really the biggest. And even having a coach, in my opinion, is a huge step in that direction because it's hard to see the mountain when you're standing on it. I'm curious to know before we dive into specifically like the one core framework, why build your own?
Well, I think for me, I don't think it's necessary. And a lot of coaches have incredible success by joining certain groups. In coaching, there's like the conscious leadership group or neuro linguistic programming. You can become a specialist, and that can be fantastic. And working with a specialist will probably get you much further on your own journey than you could on your own. So there's nothing wrong with that. I think for me, it's a personal thing. I want to have my own fingerprints on it, and I want to authentically share what I have developed and what I think is
Mhm.
most effective. And so that's for me why I did it. I've also put it into place as a founder. Not that many coaches that actually help startup founders and CEOs have been in those seats.
The
I
thing,
have.
yeah.
So I've battle tested it. And so for me, it was just, hey, what do I believe is the most valuable and impactful and what's authentic? What have I experienced? And a lot of coaching, of course, too, is how do we take this whole universe of information and simplify it so that someone can actually implement it? Right. We don't want to give them a whole novel to read and to decipher. We want to give them a few bullet points. And so my methodology, parabolic leadership, I think is a very simplified distillation of what's most important for CEOs. And because I believe in it wholeheartedly, that's typically where I start. And then I will bring on all of the other methodologies and practices to complement it.
And I love that point because you're being both the practitioner and the guide. I think it's important to have that real world experience, but also say, here's based on the journey that I took, here's the essence of what you need to learn so that you can actually not make the failures, same mistakes that I did. And I think that gives more authority too. Not to say that other coaches who don't do the work aren't valid, but in my opinion, like I'll be bold and out there and saying is that, yeah, I think if you're not doing the stuff that you teach, you shouldn't be teaching it at all. That's bold, but I leave that to my perspective. But one key thing too that you mentioned around doing the work, having your fingerprint on it. one thing to keep in mind, because I have people who will listen to this pod or people who will have conversations with, and they tell me, okay, they didn't come up with the original idea. Think about it. Anyone that comes up with an idea who taught you, now they are the one of the authority whom that idea came from. I was doing like as a personal example, I was reviewing a core direct response marketing principle that I learned, let's call it ages ago. And with that core direct, okay, who was the source that I learned it from? It was a big name, but who did they learn it from? And who did that person learn it from? And the inheritance of that thought. Where did that thought originate? Who has IP or ownership of domain over that thought? And clearly no one does, but it's the way that you've digested that thought, executed it with your own experience, and give a new insight, add new value to the thought pool. Because I think there's some people out there that think that there's no unique idea that happens anymore. And I couldn't disagree with that more because there's more unique human beings than there is and ever before in this like, statistic, right? Everyone is unique based on even the number of humans alive. And each one of us has a valid experience and a valid perception as to why something can work and cannot work in this current time and place. So, in my opinion, if you're teaching or reiterating something that may have been taught, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 months ago, putting your own fingerprint on all that terminology, and here's your added value or your value add to the shared thought pool.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to the original comment and conversation we're having about having a clear perception of reality, many ideas are simply re-articulations, or I should say new articulations, new insights. And I love how you're talking about it. It's like it's adding to the recipe, right?
Mm,
My grandmother came up with this amazing recipe. She gave it to my mother. My mother taught it to me, and I'm just going to put a little new ingredient that I found is a little bit better. And the thing when we talk about the most important concepts is that they are often hard to articulate. They're mysterious, right? They
yeah.
get human nature. And I wouldn't say anything that I do is radically original, but I try and put my own fingerprints on it. And I try and give a articulation that maybe other startup founders can understand since, I've been there and they've been there and we've been in the trenches. So that's where I'm coming from. I was very blessed to have an incredible coach named Brian Franklin, who's pretty famous in Silicon Valley. He's helped 9 companies get to 1 billion in revenue. And so much of what I do as a coach, I've learned from him. And then I put
Mm,
my own spin on it because, as you said, we're different, unique individuals.
I love that. Well, let's dive into that. I love to know your core framework and the parabolic leadership and the essence, the principles. And what does that mean? I'm pretty curious.
Yeah. So, I mentioned that I've started a few companies. I've now started three, two have been venture backed. I sold one. The one where I spent most time and ultimately sold is called Soma. And most people know it from our high end water filters. So, like Brita water filters, but beautifully designed. And of course, now we have all sorts of hydration products, coffee and tea, water bottles, so on and so forth. During that time, I started the company when I was 28.
Mm,
I knew nothing about business. I studied theology. I had no experience, no network, no reputation, no money, nothing. But I was very blessed and had a great team and raised some money, got the company off the ground. And at one point, like all entrepreneurs, I just really hit a wall. The ground was falling out below me and I didn't know what to do. Fortunately, I had met a coach, Brian Franklin. And Brian really not only helped me to save the company, ultimately sell it, but to become a much better version of my own self.
mm,
And he's the one who started to teach me a variety of different frameworks and methodologies. And after I sold Soma, I started advising founders and working one-on-one with founders. Those companies in just 5 years went from seed stage to 3 billion in valuation. So I was able to watch the ascension of these incredible companies and go through the experience of rapid hiring, raising lots of money, scaling products, taking market share. And what I discovered through that process is that there are three things that are critical for startup CEOs in particular, but really for any leader to do. And that's vision, team, and resources. In our day and age, we are always reactive. We're always getting emails and Slack notifications and pulled into meetings. And it's really hard to stay zoomed out. But the best CEOs spend upwards of 80% of their time on vision, team, and resources. And
mm.
I can unpack each one of those. But what's interesting, Raul, is when I'm coaching startup CEOs, we're talking about a million different issues. but they almost always come back to these three things: vision, team, and resources.
When you mentioned that, I'd love for us to dive a little deeper on that. But just thinking in my own experience, there's all the peripherals of acquisition, of rapid hiring, the right things to hire, the whole intricacies and even like the knots that can come into each thing overlapping, each thing not working like it should, or even like the heavy fundraising, which I've only worked with bootstraps. So I don't know the fundraising part, but I do know like the growth part. Not to those levels, of course, but not yet, at least. Let's put that in mind. So the essence comes back to those three core tenets, but how do you guide the conversation? Because I'm assuming, again, from my experience, we're looking for specific tactical problems always. How do I get the right go to market strategy? Or how do I conquer this peripheral market, take market share here, or create a new category and reposition the product at a new price point? There could be these tactical granular things that we want to dive into. And I'm assuming your CEOs are talking to you about that. How do you interweave the conversation to not only solve that initial problem, but tie it back to the core of what you just mentioned, the three team, vision, and resources?
Yeah, great questions. Just to give people an insight into coaching sessions, if they haven't worked with a coach before, the way I work with my clients who are all early stage, typically venture backed startup CEOs, is we meet every other week for 90 minutes. They bring to me their largest challenges and opportunities. And on that call, we get those handled. But then we also handle those on three different levels. The first
Mm,
is tactics. So we could get highly tactical. Before the recording started, I was telling you how I love your 80/20 day framework for how to structure a day. Highly tactical, right? Someone can listen to that episode, read that blog post, and walk away with something that could change their life, right? And so we can get highly tactical on something. The other would be frameworks. And so frameworks or mental models allow us to simplify what we're dealing with and
mhm.
often use something that's been proven like a shortcut, and so instead of having to reinvent the wheel, we can just pull something off the shelf and say, okay, here's a framework that we can apply. And then lastly is personal transformation. And as I said earlier, oftentimes a CEO can be the bottleneck of the company. And so we constantly need to transform ourselves. And so when my clients bring their biggest challenges and opportunities, we will look at those three layers. And what's interesting, Rollo, is typically people start with a very tactical issue. Issues with my co founder. I want him to agree with me that we need to expand the marketing budget. How do I do that?
Yeah.
But when we start pulling back the layers, we start seeing, yeah, of course, we could talk tactically and there are some frameworks there. But what's going on with you? Why are you so attached to the marketing budget? And why are you feeling this aversion to your co-founder? And that's where the personal development comes in. So
Uh,
what I'm doing as a coach is I'm often diagnosing this and
mhm.
saying, which layer do we want to be on? Tactical framework or personal transformation? And then I'm giving them context. I'm helping them to feel familiar. In the world where we have a million things going on in our lives, it's good to come back to a core and feel familiar. And so we might say, okay, great. Tell me the vision of your relationship with your co founder. Tell me the
Mm.
vision for sales and marketing and how we're going to spend this money. Or we might go down to team and say, okay, who do we need to hire and how can we do that systematically? Or have you developed the right people to get the results? Maybe we just need to develop the team to do more with less money. Or do we have a culture where we're going to thrive? For example, a lot of startups, they want to grow, but they don't have a growth culture. That's all
Mm.
in the team framework. Or we might go down to resources. Okay, you talked budget. Do we need to bring in more money? Do we have decision making frameworks on how to spend that money? How are you relating to it with your energy? So just having those three simple things, which each have three subcategories, we can take almost any complex issue and allow the CEO to feel comfortable discussing that.
Yeah, as you were saying this, I was drawing out the framework of how I would see it, and it's true. The surface level is the tactical, and then as you peel that layer, you get to a core of a framework or a shortcut, and that's a bigger strategy. But the core will always be beliefs, and I think forgot where I read it or heard it is that when you see this is a compare, don't do comparisons as a disclaimer as I say this, but as you see someone who has a result that you don't have in your life or business, it's because they started doing the inner work before you did. And I think this
Mm,
is critical, and that's important for us to look at what core and then you're nailing it on the head, and I love the fact of you focus on your beliefs or your what are you thinking or how what's your relationship, like, what's actually happening internally, because that does shape your behaviors, your habits, and your worldview, and I know that's been super transformative for me, my like, personally, but even, like, the parabolic leadership sounds like it's more of a that's a Swiss Army knife pretty much. Oh, now that we know what it is, should we focus on the vision? Should we focus on the team or the resources? And it becomes versatile as to how to create a moving on ramping or a solution to move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, I describe it as the spine of my coaching, and what I mean
Yeah.
by that is the backbone holds everything together in our body, and when you
Yeah.
can identify where on the spine, "Oh, this is at my neck. Okay, cool, let's explore that part of your body," and maybe it is a vision team resource thing, and then even if we identify the specific, like, let's say we went with team and then we went with developing people, which is part of the team aspect of parabolic leadership. Then now we have all these options. Okay, so for developing people, do we want to pull something from another school of thought like conscious leadership? Is there a
Mm.
framework that we can just use? Is there something about when you were an employee that we need to discover and unlock such that you can mentor people to be great? And so the vision team and resource piece is almost like a diagnostic.
Mhm.
Where are we? And then from there, we can always bring in other things to address it.
And a side question or a pivot to this, and this might be a little bit of a thought. What would you say, based on your coaching and talking to different CEOs, founders, would be the number one core belief that we have to change that is the most necessary and essential to change to achieve results?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure we can distill it down to one. And I do agree that many people are probably seeing this hierarchy where it's like beliefs create thoughts, create actions, turn into habits, create results, so on and so forth. So it's really important to think about that hierarchy and say, hey, where are we? Is it just the performance is bad because tactically, like we're not performing or we have bad habits or our thoughts and beliefs are an issue? But I actually think that when you get to the subconscious, that's where the magic happens. So even before beliefs, yes, we do address beliefs and worldviews, but sometimes there are certain patterns that are happening. And a really good transformational coach can almost like a surgeon do an incision and like cut deep and find something below the surface that neither the patient nor anyone else knew was there. And to answer your question of what will be most beneficial and transformational to the client, it's probably actually going to that level of the subconscious. And that you can only diagnose by working individually with someone and getting to know them. That is where the greatest magic happens.
For beliefs, I love that, and that is definitely super deep. And I'd be curious to like maybe get the feedback after you had some time to chew. But there might be themes. I think I'll challenge you with it. There might be some things of core beliefs or core changes because before belief, that's we can't control that, and there's not something that we can distill. There's we come from different walks of life, but I think there are core beliefs that I'd love to see what if you produce that kind of content. But Mike, I think we had a wonderful conversation. For our audience out there, what's the best place for people to one, thank you for being on, and two, learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. This has been super fun and I love the podcast. The easiest way to find me is I'm at Mike Del Ponte pretty much everywhere. Most active on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, go ahead and just follow me. You can find me at Mike Del Ponte. And my website is just mikedelponte.co. So anyone who Googles me can track me down.
Cool. Appreciate that. I'll put the links in the show notes. Mike, appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.